Hi everyone, I think we're live now, and this is for the first time on my YouTube channel. We have someone who probably don't need any introduction. This is Christopher Ruocchio, the author behind the Sun Eater series. And if you have been watching my channel for quite a while, then you will know that the Sun Eater has been taking a lot of my obsession lately. And well, welcome Christopher Ruocchio to the channel. And Chris, can you introduce yourself to those who are new here?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm Christopher Ruocchio, like Petrik was saying. I have written am writing the Sun Eater science fantasy series, but I was also for 7 years junior editor at Baen Books, who were not originally my publisher, are now my publisher. Publishing is, a strangely incestuous business, but here we are. So I've been both an editor and a writer. I did a lot of like short story anthology editing when I worked there. I wasn't so much in acquisitions, working with new authors, although I did a little bit of that. But I am most, I guess, known for writing the Sun Eater series, which is 6 books, will be 7. The 6th is out in April. That's Disquiet Gods. The first is Empire of Silence. Came out in 2018. So I've been sort of plugging along as fast as I can to get the series sort of done. It's been sort of a project for my whole life. I started trying to write when I was to write seriously when I was like 8 years old. I thought I'd have to be like 70 before I could get a book published. I didn't really know the rules. But it turns out you can do that much sooner, thank heavens. So I've been writing ever since I was a kid, and seem to finally made it work, which is great. So
Wow,
that's
since 8 years old.
Yeah, I liked science fiction. I liked fantasy. My parents, obviously, they read to me when I was little. I was reading really early too, and so I think it was 4 when Harry Potter came out, and of course that was like the inescapable sort of cultural moment that it was. Yeah. And so I was like the youngest possible person to cash onto that because I was reading, like I said, reading really early. I went through that to Tolkien, sort of on the fantasy side of things, but I was also a big Star Wars kid. My parents were very careful about what I was allowed to watch as far as television and film was concerned, but Star Wars was cool. They liked Star Wars, so I grew up watching the laser discs of the original movies, and then I read like the Timothy Zahn books and a bunch of the like Kevin Anderson books for like younger readers and things like that. And so there were sort of those 2 threads. And I spent a long time growing up trying to reconcile both science fiction and fantasy, and I decided why not both? And so here we are. But now I tried to I started to start writing seriously. Like I wanted to write a book when I was in grade school, when I was a kid, and I finished something that is at least book shaped in high school. It wasn't very good. And then from high school and into college, I worked on what would become Empire of Silence. When I started, it was an epic fantasy novel. It was completely unrecognizable to readers now. But I would throw it away repeatedly, frustrated with myself, and start over. But when I got into the last couple of years in college, I realized I was like kind of running out of time. I got an English degree because, like I always say when I mention this, I hate money. And so I thought, I should really get this whole book thing figured out before I graduate, as if it would necessarily be that easy. But it did work out. I got an agent about a month before I graduated college. I published the book, or sold the book to a publisher about a month after I graduated. And, I've been... Nice. And that was the same week that I got hired at Baen Books. So I was hired by the competition a couple days after I sold the book, or vice versa. I can never remember which way it happened. It was literally within like 2 days of each other. And so I have been working in publishing ever since. That's been 9 years now that I've been either working as a editor or publishing books. So
I think it is utterly impressive. I mean, you probably know already from my reviews, but yeah, considering that the Sun Eater definitely gets like what I really love in science fantasy, and you really nailed all of that, especially the galaxy spanning world building. And before we get around to ranking the books, I just want to ask, was it ever since the original vision that to put the Sun Eater like covering all the way across the universe, not just within Earth?
When it became something that like readers would recognize as maybe an early version of the Sun Eater, it was always going to be a bigger story. It was never going to be confined to Earth or confined to the solar system. There was a time when it started out as more of a like Sword and Planet space fantasy concept that was set in what looked like a epic fantasy world, and then at the end of the book, it revealed that it was sort of the way that Star Ocean does. It reveals that actually this isn't a fantasy game; it's a science fiction game. And that was the book I actually finished in high school. The sort of the end was these fantasy characters getting contacted by astronauts, basically, and it was like pretty cool. Like I like that idea, but it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. I was a kid, right? It wasn't good enough. And as I sort of continued to grow from there, it became more of a traditional space opera kind of story. I'd love to revisit this idea from when I was a kid and rewrite that book now. I think that'd be kind of fun. But a lot of the pieces of that book, especially like character names and place names, actually survived in some form or other into the series. The fantasy world in that book was called UA, which is a name that shows up in a completely different context in Sun Eater. And so I conserved a lot of my effort from that earlier sort of project as a kid when I started the Sun Eater properly.
I think that's pretty cool though. And it's funny that you mentioned Star Ocean. That was a
Yeah,
flashback in the past.
Oh yeah, no, I am a big video game guy. I don't get to play as much as I would like anymore, but this is sort of a strain of influence on my work that doesn't come up as often. People always want to talk about Dune, which that's fine. But I was a big like JRPG kid growing up. Never really a big Final Fantasy guy, but Star Ocean, the Tales games, more obscure stuff like Bankaitos Lost Odyssey. These are the Japanese games or Japanese science fiction fantasy, whether that's anime, manga, video games, whatever, right, tends to be a lot looser in terms of where the boundaries are between genres than Western stuff tends to do. And I always like that because I like having swords and laser guns, right, robots and wizards. It's much more fun to sort of do both. And so I always sort of rebel against the very rigid genre distinctions that you run into in Western publishing, particularly on like the indie side. They have to like make sure that they pigeonhole what they're writing for the algorithm, right? And I've never been happy thinking that way. And so that was sort of has been sort of a huge influence on me, just in general, has been the sort of the sort of genre blending, the looseness of tropes in Japanese storytelling, again, whether that's video games or whatever. But that was probably video games have been the predominant form of media like I grew up engaging with. Because you could get a lot more out of a 100-hour game than you could out of a book. And like I was a kid, I was spending my parents' money, so like it was a choice between like $60, $50 on a video game, or like $10 on a book that I would get through in like a week, right? As opposed to I might play a video game for a month or play it again, and it'd be 2 months or whatever, right? And so I tended with my reading to have like the same. I would reread the same books over and over. I still do. I talked about like Lord of the Rings is my favorite novel, right? Which I know is a cliche answer for a science fiction fantasy writer, but it is that good. And I had the audiobooks, and they were the only audiobooks I owned. So I would listen to them over and over and over again because it's all I had, rather than go to the bookstore and buy another $70 of books like every 2 weeks or something. It just wasn't feasible. So I ended up playing and replaying a lot of games because they were a bit more economic, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Star Ocean is great in conclusion.
And hearing those answers actually make me happy even more because, like you, I've always been a gamer, especially Japanese role-playing games. I've always played all of those, like Star Ocean, the Tales of games. Well, I'm a fan of Final Fantasy though, so there is that. But yeah, I played all of them, so maybe some part of that kind of like blended into the Sun Eater somehow, maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely in there. And in my defense, with regard to Final Fantasy, I just never had the right consoles. I didn't have a PlayStation until the 4 came out, and so it was very hard to get most of the Final Fantasy games. So I missed out on like 7 and 10, and I've been thinking about going back and playing them. But I think the only Final Fantasy game I own is 3, which is actually 6, right, for the Super Nintendo, which of course is probably the best one, right? So That's
It's a great game.
I
It's
mean,
a
that is
great
an
game.
opinion of people. Yeah, it's awesome. That's but I never got into. I made the mistake of trying to play 13 when it was on the Xbox, and that was a mistake. 13 is not so good. But anyway,
That's understandable though. Understandable. Okay. Before we
yeah,
really
it's
begin here,
nobody's favorite Final Fantasy game, that's
yeah.
for sure.
And before we really begin the ranking, I think just one more question: would you be interested in writing for video games someday?
Oh yeah, sure. I think that'd be fun. I did write for Marvel Comics once. I did one comic book script for a 10-page story, and it was really cool to sort of learn because the difference in medium, right, changes the way the writing works in a lot of ways. In the case of comic books, it took a lot of pressure off of me because most of my work was like just art direction, right? It was sort of disappearing. So it was a lot easier to write because the only thing people would really see directly was the dialogue or like the text boxes. And so it was really to the artists to really make the story work. I had to figure out how many panels and stuff we needed and what I wanted in each panel. But I think there'd probably be a similar sort of relationship between the script and the video game, right? And that you have to take in, different dimensions like the gameplay, right? And maybe player choice and things like that. So I think learning to write in a different style and different mode would be fun. I have a friend who's been working on a sort of old school, sort of mana kind game, secret mana kind of game, and he's been talking about maybe me writing a side quest for that. When he gets around to that part of the whole process, I think that would be fun one day. More on that if it ever develops, but I think it would be kind of a blast. So.
Well, if you do write for video games, you know that I will be playing that, whatever it is.
Oh yeah, no, well, thank you. That's one. So.
That's one.
Yeah.
You will get a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah, sure. But now I feel better. It's not going to be zero, right? That's
Yeah.
the worst case scenario. So we've avoided that already. So that's good.
Yeah. Okay, I think we will begin the ranking. So the way this works is that I will ask Christopher to rank based on difficulty in writing and also which one is his favorite among all of his books that he wrote in the main novels in the Sun Eater. And I think we'll just begin immediately from the first one, Empire of Silence.
Okay, so in terms of like overall or so like difficulty in writing, this one is maybe middle of the pack because it took longer for me to write Empire of Silence than any other book, right? Because of course, if we count, depending on how we count, right? Do we count all the way back from when I was 8 years old? Probably not. But it probably took something like 2-3 years to really get this book done because the original book I wrote was half as long. It was called The Murdered Sun. It is completely different. Valka's not in it. There's no Colosseum. There are no Myrmidons. Emesh is a very different planet. Gilliam is a very different character. It is I think of interest to readers maybe only in like an academic sense. I think it's not as good as Empire of Silence. But my original editor at Doll Books, the lady who acquired me, she was like, we will buy the book, but I want you to consider these like couple revision notes, right? And no need to get into those, but she wanted me basically to change and or explain the world building a lot more, with the result that I needed to add a lot to the book. And I kind of cheated. I kind of seized the opportunity to double the length of the book anyway, because I wanted to write giant books. And I was like, oh, great. They said they bought the book now, and they said they don't care if the book gets longer. I think her exact quotes were, "We published Patrick Rothfuss. You will be fine."
Okay.
And which turned out to not exactly be true, because long books are actually very difficult for publishers to deal with logistically. They're more expensive to print and all this stuff. So I was kind of tricked too. But I also tricked them. I seized the opportunity to like turn The Murdered Sun into Empire of Silence, and that meant that after the book was sold, this was the book that was the most heavily edited, the most heavily revised, rewritten, changed, and that added another year and a half, because I sold Empire of Silence to Doll Books in January 2016, and then it didn't come out until July of 2018, which is a long time. So that was pretty hard. So I think the only books that were harder are the two that got split, and Disquiet Gods, which was just a nightmare. So I think that would make it the was that the fourth most difficult to write.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll try to write this down so I can recount everything at the end. But
Yeah.
in order, but yeah, no. So Empire of Silence it was tougher. I also didn't have like a procedure yet. I didn't really know how to write.
Yeah.
People will complain about maybe the pacing or the story structure in that book. That's the book that isn't outlined. I didn't outline yet. I was just writing as I went. I figured, I had time. I was working on it in college. I had a few years to figure out how to finish a book and what I wanted that book to be, and it went through a lot. It had a frame narrative originally, and when I started to look for agents, nobody was picking up. No one was even looking at the book. They would they would look at the prologue that I sent, and they were like, no. And mostly you just like not get an answer. So my faculty advisor at college was like, you got this frame narrative, like when is that going to pay off? And I was like, oh, at the end of the series. And he's like, get rid of that.
Oh.
He was like, just cut the frame narrative completely. You don't need it. And that was the best advice I've ever gotten. And that was John Kessel, who is published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press. Actually, he's a science fiction writer in his own right. And that was really, really helpful. He went through my critique for me, or my submission for me, and told me what I was doing wrong, and it was a big help. So Empire of Silence was pretty tricky, but it wasn't like it wasn't the hardest of the bunch to write in a lot of ways.
And were you satisfied with the result?
Yeah. At the time, I was really happy with it. Now it's sort of my least favorite of the books. I think it's the one that if I had a chance to go back and sort of George Lucas it, I would. I would clean up, and I did actually with the Diamond Edition. I listened to the audiobook and I flagged every sentence that bothered me as I was listening to it, and so I actually heavily revised the book for the Diamond Edition. Not like I didn't change plot or anything like that, but I changed some like minor character names. I changed some terms. I changed a lot of just quality of life things. A lot of the sentences got better. I didn't add a chapter or anything like that. Although I've been thinking about doing that for the later Diamond editions. I might add stuff or something or change things on purpose to mess with people, because I think that could be fun. Because like part of the thing with the Sun Eater, right, is that it's a document, right, that exists in its own universe. And so if that changes, it's sort of like you see in like translations of scripture, right? Things can be different and people come away with different interpretations because of that. I kind of want to play with that doing these special editions. But Empire of Silence is the book that I think it's the I hate to say the worst one because I still think it's pretty good, but it is, I think, not as good as Howling Dark, Demon in White, Kings of Death, etc. I think I got better mostly because I learned how to outline. So I think those later books are better because they're more deeply structured.
Yeah, I understand it. And is this something that Door Books actually allowed to do this heavy revision for the Diamond Edition?
So they didn't really have anything to do with that. So when you license a book to do a special edition, really what you're buying is permission, right, to publish the book. I didn't really talk to them about the fact that I wanted to revise it, because there's not really anything they can do with that, right? They're not going to retypeset the book in their edition. They're not going to pay to do all of that, right? And so they wouldn't really be interested in sort of fixing that version. So my hope is that future special editions will use the revised text for those, and if the rights ever revert and I publish a new edition of the book somewhere else or whatever, then the new text will get used. But there's not really anything I can do with it as far as DAW is concerned. And it's not hugely different. Like, it's not a different book. It's just a cleaned up book, right? There's nothing more. There's not really anything so big as like, I know you may know with the first edition of The Hobbit, right? Gollum just shows Bilbo the way out of the cave, right? And when he went to write Lord of the Rings later, he changed the ending of that because it was now the One Ring. Like, he didn't know that originally. So there's nothing that serious in the Empire of Silence revision. Some things are clarified, or there are some continuity errors that are fixed, because there are some things that I realized were problems later in the series.
Mhm.
for something that I needed to fix. But the problem was there's a problem with this. I had people reading Disquiet Gods in early access now, and there was a continuity error about Crispin. And
Okay.
but the problem was in Demon and White. The problem wasn't in Disquiet Gods, so I couldn't
Oh.
fix Demon and White. So this happens with first editions sometimes. There are these little problems, and but yeah, no. So I haven't really told Daw that I revised the book for the special edition at
Mhm.
all, and
Mhm.
they're not going to want to do anything with it anyway. So
Yeah. Which is odd to me. Okay.
yeah, well, that's a whole thing. So
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
yeah,
But well, personally, for me, I do love Empire of Silence. I mean, I have read only until Kingdoms of Death. I haven't read the fifth and the sixth book yet.
right.
But I think, yeah, if I have to rank, this will probably be my least favorite. But you know how much I love Empire of Silence already. But I think many kind of agree, many readers agree that Howling Dark up to Kingdoms of Death are probably one of their favorite books of all time. And with
Yeah,
that in
yeah,
mind, let's move on to the second book. And that is Howling Dark. I think this is really where you start to really gain your writing voice. This
yeah.
one.
I think that's right. I this is my favorite child, except for my real actual child. Helen Dark was the easiest book to write. It was the smoothest. I didn't have any like giant thing in my personal life that was complicating my ability to write. It was easy to get it done. It was actually finished in 2017. It was finished before Empire of Silence came out by a margin. I actually
Wow.
started writing the novellas because I was like so far ahead. I was like, I don't want to write book 3 yet. Book 1 isn't even out. Like, what if they change something in book 2? Because Daw hadn't read Howling Dark yet, and I didn't want to get that far ahead and have them have like a serious issue with something in the book, which didn't happen. But I actually started writing the novellas so far ahead. This book it was the one also where I learned to outline. It's the book where I like became a professional writer in a sense, not just in terms of finding my voice, I guess, as a writer, but in terms of having like a protocol for writing. A lot of my sort of method was sort of built to write Howling Dark, because the thing about writing a first book is you don't have a contract, and you don't know if anybody's going to even look at it, much less publish it. And so I had like theoretically infinite time. None of us has infinite time, of course, but like to write Empire of Silence, I had years. But then once you have a contract for, in my case, it was 4 books originally. They were like, cool, when can you have book 2 to us? And can it be next year? And I was like, oh crap, right? Like I've never written a book in a year before. And so I needed to come up with a method for doing that. And for me, I think writer's block is mostly the result of not having thought about plot and like what's
Um,
happening in a scene mostly. I always say, like, you say you have writer's block, and then you go on Facebook and someone has a bad opinion and you write an essay telling them why they're wrong. The writing is fine. It turns out it's something else that is the problem. So outlining for me got rid of most of my writer's block. As long
um,
as I've outlined, as long as I've written the scene in outline form, right? I think of my outlines as low resolution drafts. If that scene exists already in like 1 page, 2 page form, then I know what it is and what I have to do, because I've already written it. I've just written it in short form, and so it's a lot easier to write the proper chapter or whatever when I get there. So I developed all that for Howling Dark, and of course, Howling Dark it's dark, it's spooky, it's weird,
mm, yeah.
and it like that's all fun for me. I love all the Vorgoso stuff. Karn is difficult to write, Brethren is difficult to write, but like it's fun. They're both fun to write. And so I enjoy what's in the story. It's also I think the book where like Empire of Silence was very self-consciously written in the style of and with reference to Frank Herbert and Gene Wolfe and Jack
Mm,
Vance and Edgar Rice Burroughs and Zelazny and like all of these writers that I grew up liking. I wanted the book to evoke that feel and style. And so if there's a criticism of that first book, and I don't think it's an unjustified criticism, it's that it cleaves too closely to the source material, right? It feels too familiar to some readers. And that was always a deliberate choice on my part. I wanted people who like that stuff to say, oh, like I'm in good hands. This guy likes the same stuff that I like. But with Howling Dark, that was really where I wanted to start pulling the rug out from under people and showing them actually the plan was always to do something new, but I wanted to do something new in comparison and in contrast to what's come before. And so I think it's in that book you talk about me finding my voice there. I think that's where sort of my master plan, as it were, is really, it starts to get implemented. And so I'm very proud of Howling Dark to this day. I think it's one of the best books I've written.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And when I first saw how you utilize the vision tropes in Howling Dark, I think it was absolutely incredible. You know how usually prophecies and visions are now kind of like disliked by many readers, right? But I think I disagree with that, and this is a great example of how to use that in your story and foreshadowing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the tropes that readers say they hate, like prophecies, like chosen ones, they actually don't hate. I think that everybody is lying. I think they like those tropes. I think what they don't like is how often those tropes are done badly. Now, I'm
Mhm.
not saying that I do them perfectly necessarily every time or anything, but I think about the stories that I grew up loving as a kid, and they're all very very much embedded in these tropes, right? That people say they hate, right? Those tropes really resonate with you as a kid when you're growing up, and I think that's because those tropes are actually good. It's just a question of implementation, and so that's something I think about all the time. I very often have done a thing that people say they hate or they don't do or shouldn't be done on purpose because I want to see if I can change their minds. So I mean, I give the ending away on the first page, right? People say they hate that, but some people do and they don't read on, and that's fine. But the people who sort of stick it out, but they come maybe to change their mind on some of this, and I think that's good. So
Well, we have the gift of foresight, right?
yes, there we go.
Here's what Orion said: Howling Dark is the good. It's the cover that got me into the series, and it's the book that solidified Sun Eater as my favorite series. And I need to ask you on that. Do you have any involvement in the creation of the cover art here? Because
Yes.
the cover art is some of the best that I've ever seen in science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah, so I with the first book, actually, Dahl was extremely generous. They let me give them a short list of artists that I thought would be a good fit.
Oh,
And so Sam Weber was my pick for the first cover. Sam couldn't continue with us. He was busy, I think, doing the folio edition of Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun and couldn't come back for Howling
oh,
Dark.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
like totally like Sam is great. I totally forgive him. I bought a first edition of those, and they are awesome. So Godspeed, Sam. So Kieran was their choice, that they wanted to find somebody, Kieran Yanner, who's done the rest of the covers. They wanted to
Yeah.
find somebody who they felt could continue the covers in the style that Sam had sort of set up with that first book. And Kieran has done a tremendous job. I write like 2 to 3 page descriptions of each cover. And I always try to like leave room for Kieran to sort of, extemporize on his own too. Usually with like the backgrounds, I'll be like, I kind of like wanted to have like some ruins in it, but like the color, the rest of that's all you, man. You figure it out. But I write these pretty detailed descriptions of the characters, and then he will go. Sometimes I get to see the thumbnails early, and like can get some early input and stuff. So I think a couple of the covers I just was shown the final cover at the end, and Kieran has always been very, very good at getting within like 90% of my vision, like with very little additional notes, right? I think the biggest note I've ever given him was one Ashes of Man's cover. I had him darken Velka's hair significantly. Originally it was like violently red, and I was like, no, like more black, right? More black than red. But I think that was like the biggest note I ever gave. So the Daw covers, I'm like intimately involved with making. The Bane covers, I'm in now that they've taken over. I've been intimately involved with, and even more so because I used to work for Bane, so they're
Yeah.
like a lot more cavalier about me just talking to the artist directly. Most of the time, they're like, publishers usually like want to really keep the authors away from the artists' direct communication, because some authors, and you like never know which one it's going to be, get like really persnickety in particular, and they can really piss the artists off, and so you like you want a professional buffer between them. Kieran and I have worked together now for years, and we like work together really well. He's currently he's done a cover for the Murdered Sun, actually, the sort of proto version of Empire of Silence we're doing as a special edition with my friends
Yeah.
over at Inderita Books in the UK. And he's
Nice.
gonna do the main books over now for them too. So he's working on Empire of Silence now, which is very exciting because he didn't get to do Empire of Silence the first time.
Amazing.
But yeah, so it's really cool. No, he's tremendous. I love working with him. I love working with James on the Diamond editions, and John and Taryn, and like the art direction is really fun. Honestly, like it is one of my favorite parts of the whole process. So.
Yeah. Well, the result I certainly have no complaints.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I've been very, very blessed. All the artists I've worked with have been tremendous. The UK ones, I don't have any input on. They just sort of do those. So like
Oh,
publishers all have
okay.
like a different style. This is the point I was
Mhm.
building up to. It just sort of depends on how the publisher wants to operate. So with both my UK publishers, they've just sort of done the cover and said here it is, and like that's cool too. But it is very rewarding to get to work with the artist directly and to, like I've worked with Kieran now for like 5 years. So like that's cool. Yeah.
Amazing. And before we move on to Demon in White, I guess I should do this star chat first, a super chat first. What about Eastern influence like Japanese manga and anime? Well, I think Christopher actually answered that in the beginning of this video, but I'll let you take this away, Chris.
Yeah, no, those have been a pretty significant factor in sort of my life, I guess, as a nerd, right? In a lot of ways, as much, maybe more so than literature or like Hollywood movies or something like that.
Mm,
I'm a big gamer. I really love particularly like Japanese RPGs. That was sort of my thing growing up. I don't get to play them as much as I used to. But as far as anime and manga are concerned, those have also been a huge thing. Mostly anime growing up, because I could just watch you know Cowboy Bebop on TV, but I
yeah.
would have to go buy manga usually, and there were alternative methods of procuring it, but try to actually do things correctly. But no, so I sort of dropped off a little bit on the anime thing around the time I was writing the books. I went through a period in college where I wasn't watching a lot of it, but I'm sort of going back through. Now I've been on a big anime kick because I'm too tired to read in the evening now with the baby, so I watch TV. So I've been watching through Ghost in the Shell, Standalone Complex, and I got Second Gig as well. So that's sort of my show for the moment. Um,
Incredible. I love Ghost in the Shell. I think great. I
it's
think that's a
so
great
good.
movie. So good, so good.
Oh, the Oshii film is a masterpiece.
Yeah,
I adore Mamoru Oshii. He's a genius. Um,
and that's the answer to Eastern influence. And I'm really happy because I think this is something that I wish more authors or more readers try because manga and anime do contain a lot of amazing storytelling. Not just do not judge them only based on their format.
yeah, this is comic books have like a very different reputation in America. I think
Mm,
I think it's changed right in the last few generations, but like my because like really our big publishers only really do superheroes, right? So if you don't like superheroes, and like I like them okay, I like Batman a lot, but like the rest of them, eh.
eh.
I say this having written Thor, right? But
Oh yeah.
you know, which like I like Thor because I like Norse mythology, so that was why I picked him. But like if you don't like superheroes, you're kind of like left out in the cold, and that have a reputation consequently for being like really for kids, right? And
Mm,
that's not true of manga, right? Particularly like in Japan itself, right? Like everybody reads comic books, right? It's
yeah.
very different culture, and that's changing here, like I said. But it's we're still living in the shadow of DC and Marvel in a lot of ways in terms of broader like non-nerd cultural attitudes towards the medium. Now the movies have like opened up a lot of that to people, but I think like my someone in my parents' generation would just be like they're just like silly books for kids, whatever, man. But then they'll go watch Star Wars, right? So it's like did you think about this a little bit more? But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I assume Berserk is an influence on you, right?
Yeah, Berserk is my favorite manga for sure. That was actually a pretty late discovery. My friend, my roommate, actually, before I met my wife, he was constantly trying to get me to read it, and I have like this, like I'm just like deeply disagreeable. If someone like constantly is bothering me to try and check something out, I just won't do it on principle. And so like he was living with me, and he stacked all of the tankobon up in my room, and he was like, "Just read it." But you have to read the first three. If you don't get to Golden Age, you're not getting the right sample. So I'm like, you want me to read 3 books, all right, before I make up my mind? Like that is a tall order, right? Like it's not right. It's manga. You can read those in like a couple hours. But but I finally did it. This was like in 2015, 2016. I think Empire of Silence was written already. So like it was pretty late that I actually read Berserk,
Uh,
but I love it. I have all the like deluxe hardcovers. I need to get my bookshelves built still so that I can put
nice.
everything out. But no, Berserk's huge for me. Akira, particularly the manga, which is like the movie's amazing, but the
Yeah.
manga is like even better.
Yeah.
Ghost in the Shell's huge. As a kid growing up, Full Metal Alchemist still great, but I
Oh,
watched a lot of Shaman King, which was pretty awesome. But we had all the 4 Kids shows growing up. I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
like when One Piece came over here. I've never got into it, but like I
Uh,
remember when that was like a new thing. So I was like that. I was like that generation of. I was a weeb before we called them weebs. Um,
Look, me too. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I guess I still am. I don't. They started using the word weeb when I wasn't really like keeping up with anime and manga, so like it feels sort of alien to me. I'm like, when did this happen? How did this happen? How did we get here?
Yeah, yeah.
But um,
Well,
yeah.
this is something related. Top three favorite anime and top three favorite video games. And how do you pronounce your last name?
No, yeah. So the last name first is Rockio. It's easier than it looks. Traditionally, it should be said Rocchio, but in America, we gave up.
We gave
Americans say their R's differently, so we just sort of dropped all that. But my family's from Benevento in southern Italy. Came over here in like 1900. So we're like thoroughly Americanized at this point, but there's still a little of the old country in us. But as far as top 3 favorite anime, man, that's tough. Cowboy Bebop for sure is number one. Probably uh, Ghost in the Shell, sort of in aggregate, is in
Mhm.
there, and then maybe. Man, it's tough. I'm really bad at
Tough.
ranking things, actually, but like maybe man, I really loved Dot Hack Sign as a kid. That was cool.
Oh,
I
I love
really
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. The music is so good.
Yeah.
I like Full Metal Alchemist. I like Psychopaths a lot. Uh it's hard to know for sure. I feel like I'm missing a really obvious one here. But
This one. Steins
that's
Gate.
fine. Yeah. Steins Gate. Yeah, Steins Gate's pretty good. I was but Yeah, no, it's tough. It's tough. As far as video games, that's even tougher. I'm a big Legend of Zelda fan. I
Zelda.
think
Yeah.
I think Wind Waker and Majora's Mask are the best Zelda games. I'm
But
not
from
really with
software.
it with the new games. What's that?
From software games. Do you play them?
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
Oh yeah.
So actually I got Dark Souls the day it came out because my roommate was a big Demon Souls fan, and I
Okay.
hated it. I couldn't figure out what to do or where to go. I kept trying to fight the skeletons in Firelink Shrine, and I was like,
Yeah,
"This
yeah.
game is broken. I'm returning it." So I returned Dark Souls day one, and like a year or so later, after the DLC came out, I was at a friend's house and they were playing in Ulasil. They were fighting Artorias, and I was like, "Wait a minute, this game is awesome." Wait, so I went back and got Dark Souls again later, repurchased it, and got real into it then, because when it first came out, of course, there was like no explanation of what to do or where to go, and I was too stupid to notice the way up to the Undead Burg at all. Like I didn't see it. Um,
Okay, okay,
so
yeah.
I completely goofed, and I only played for like an hour. I was like, man, I don't know about this purchase. I'm gonna get my. I was in college, right? I didn't have a lot of money. I was waiting tables, and so I was like, I'm gonna go get my $60 back. Like this is a mistake. But I got back into it later, and I've been a big fan ever since. I've played everything since, except I missed Sekiro.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten around to it yet. Bloodborne is probably my favorite of the bunch.
Yeah,
Um,
it's incredible. The vibe, the atmosphere there is insane.
It is. It's so good. And it's of course, and it's the hardest of the bunch too. It is
Mm,
punishingly difficult. But the world building in that is tremendous.
yeah.
Uh, of the Dark Souls games, I like the first one the best. Two, I think it's a bad rap. Three, I think is hugely overrated. I like Elden Ring a lot. But it's not as well balanced because of the open world thing. So I think it's a more uneven experience. But I think if you like haven't played them, like Elden Ring is a great place to get into them.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to the DLC, which I think we're gonna hear about. You know, um,
Soon. I think
soon.
I
Yeah,
think it'll
like
be
this
soon.
month. Yeah.
Also, this is a good one. I think this has been derailed, so let's start with
Yeah,
Demon
that's.
in
I mean,
White.
it's what this happens every single time I do a stream ever. It
And
just
it's fun, you know. I don't get to talk a lot about this kind of things on my YouTube channel, so yeah, it's really great. And we'll start with probably many people's favorite. This is it. This is Demon in White. So which one is this for the ranking for
Yeah,
you?
so this goes right under Howling Dark for me in terms of it was a little bit more difficult. It's longer. If you remember the chapter on the mountain, that chapter was a nightmare. Each book
Ah,
since Howling Dark has had a really difficult chapter. Um, the easiest of the very difficult chapters was the Brethren chapter in Howling Dark. That one took like 2 weeks, which is very
oh,
unusual. Usually I finish a chapter in like 3-4 days when I'm writing it. 2 weeks was the first time I ran into this problem. But Demon White had two. There was that one, and then there's the one in the basement of the library. That one took a long time to write. So Demon White was more difficult. I was also getting ready to get married, which makes the title very funny. My wife likes to tell
Demon in White.
when we were engaged at the time and planning the wedding and all of this. And the book, of course, is dedicated to her, so she feels the need to point out that I wrote a book called Demon in White the year we were getting married.
Oh, Jaina.
Yeah, so she thinks that's very funny. Of course, has nothing to do with the title,
Yeah.
but it was harder to write just because like life was getting in the way in a lot of ways. And I had like very little time to edit it as well. My not my original editor, but my second editor, Dog, was perennially months late getting notes back to me, and I wasn't ever left with a lot of time. So this one was hilariously, Demon in White is the book that is the least edited. Almost nothing changed. You're basically reading
Wow.
the first draft.
Oh,
There was some like track change, like line edits involved, but like no big structural edits. Nothing basically changed from the outline at all. Um,
amazing. And it's the
so
biggest one, right?
it is. It is fractionally longer than Disquiet Gods. Disquiet Gods is like 2,000, 3,000 words shorter. So they'll look about as long next to each other, but it is the longest one. But it wasn't the hardest one to write. It's it was all in all like not a difficult, terrible experience like some of the other books, but it wasn't easy either. It was just a little harder than
Yeah.
a little harder than Howling Dark. Howling Dark was just so smooth. That's been the easiest writing experience of them all. But as far as like ranking goes, I think it's
Yeah.
probably, I think people are right. Like of the books that most people have read, it's probably the strongest in the series.
Mm,
It wasn't, it didn't get split by my publisher. So that kind of
thankfully.
disqualifies a couple of the books from being, the best one because it wasn't the book that I wanted, people to read.
Mm,
So I go back and forth. I like Howling Dark better just because like I like the vibe a little bit more, but I understand why people privilege Demon White above um
Howling Dark.
uh, uh above Howling Dark. It's a bit it's like five people like to say it's like five books in a trench coat, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of stuff that happens in the book. You get a lot, so people get a lot of they get a lot for their money. This is a good deal, right? If you were me as a kid and you're like, ooh, $30 on a book or $60 on a video game, like Demon in White like comes pretty close to being the JRPG of books. Like there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
There's side quests. They go to the beach. It's
Yeah. They did.
yeah, it's a pretty JRPG book. And so I get why people like that one. It's also maybe the most sort of upbeat and non-depressing of the bunch. So I get why people put it there. But for me, it's a little harder to write than Howling Dark. And maybe I like it a little bit less for taste reasons. But
Yeah.
but I understand why it's most people's favorite.
It's personally my favorite as of now. I think it is absolutely amazing. And as you said earlier, it is kind of like five books structured into one effectively and efficiently anyway. And it was the first time I think in the series that you kind of employed a murder mystery setting. And I think
Yeah.
it worked brilliantly. I love that very much.
Yeah, I love writing the political intrigue stuff. There's a bit of that. There's a bit of that coming in Disquiet Gods. And I'm writing a short story. It's sort of 3 chapters long right now for Bane. They're going to put it up free on their website.
Oh,
That is sort of a prologue to Disquiet Gods. That's a little bit more court intrigue. Some people, Zin, I know you're in the chat, were they want more Jad, so it's set in the
Okay.
Jadian court, and it got a little bit of political wrangling involved. So I love that stuff. It's so much fun to write.
And I think it is also about balance because, as you said, it is a bit upbeat, kind of relatively upbeat anyway, compared to the rest
Yeah,
of the series.
it still gets there, but it's not as apocalyptic as Kingdoms of
Yeah,
Death is.
Kingdom,
So
yeah, Kingdoms of Death is insane. I still owe you a slap for that. Okay.
I had a gentleman walk up to me. I was at a convention a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Are you Christopher Ruocchio?" And I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool. Yes, I am." And he's like, "I hate you right now." And I was like, "What did I do this time?" And he said, "I just finished Kingdoms of Death." And I was like, "Oh, well, in that case, here you go." And he was cool about it, but he literally had just finished it on the drive to the convention, so he was not happy with me. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
no, I totally get it why people would be mad about that one.
it's amazing though. I loved it personally. I loved it, but I also understand if someone did not like all the darkness in that book. But yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I that was the one I was most worried about in a lot of ways, which I guess is a good way to segue to it, right? Uh, Kingdoms of Death was supposed to be like one big giant book, right? It was supposed to be, it was supposed to go all the way from the start to the end of Perfusion. So it was supposed to be Ashes of Man, Kings of Death, one book. When I finished it, it was like 330,000 words, I want to say, which is really, really long. I finished it in uh, March 2021. So I think it was the longest it took me to write a book, maybe.
Mm.
Disquiet Gods took about 300 days, like 280 something days. So Disquiet Gods is really hard to. But I turned it in, and then I didn't hear anything for like 6 months. And then Daw tells me that and this actually isn't their fault. Daw was forced by Penguin Random House to cap their books at 200,000 words unless it was for like Tad Williams or Patrick Rothfuss, right? Someone they knew they could earn out on, because long books are really, really expensive. And so I was sort of forced to come up with a solution here. And so Kingdoms of Death, the place to cut it was very obvious, but it was either cut about half of that book out and throw it away, or turn it into 2 books. So I turned it into 2 books.
Mm.
But getting into those books on the split, Kingdoms of Death was easier than Ashes of Man because I kind of wrote them at the same time. They became 2 books at the same time, and but with the Kingdoms of Death half, I think I added 1 chapter to it and like packed it off, because by the time I was told they had to split the books, I had like 3 weeks to like get the first half of that like to ship so that they could edit it. So the Kingdoms of Death book is basically exactly the same as the first half of the bigger book that I wrote originally.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
it
Okay.
basically didn't change. I added a little bit to the journey at the end when they're traveling from UA to Colchis. I'm trying to be vague about these things. I added like a
Yeah.
chapter in there, but otherwise it's basically the same. I like rewrote what became the last chapter so that it read like a last chapter, but that was it.
Mm.
So that had turned around pretty quickly, and I got to Ashes of Man. So, but in terms of difficulty, these 2 books are the hardest ones. I think Kingdoms of Death is like right under. Actually, that's not quite. Yeah, they are the hardest ones. It's not right under Empire of Silence, but it's like it's right at the bottom. Except the Ashes of Man is worse. Ashes of Man
Oh,
is the hardest one to write. Period. Because I thought I'd already written it,
yeah.
and then they tell me I have to split the book. And when I split the book, the way that the original book was structured meant that what I got pushed into Ashes of Man and got ejected from Kingdoms of Death, because the original book was just called Kingdoms of Death. When it was 5 books, the 4th one was Kingdoms of Death. And when Ashes of Man got, created, like Dionysus being pulled out of Zeus's leg from Kingdoms of Death, it didn't have a beginning.
Ah.
And so I had to do this weird thing where I wrote the first like 20 chapters of Ashes of Man to tie into the 30 or so chapters I already had. And so I understand why for a lot of people, now there are people for whom Ashes of Man is their favorite book, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a toss up usually between Ashes of Man and Empire of Silence for people's least favorite book. And when they don't like when they don't like Ashes of Man, it's because the pacing feels weird. And the pacing feels weird because it's a Frankenstein's monster of a novel. It was the ending of another novel that was the previous novel,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
this new like opening 20 chapters. So I took more time to sort of deal with the consequences of Kingdoms of Death. And so it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more melancholy,
Melancholy.
and maybe a bit more meandering. It takes a little while to like find its momentum. There are people for whom this is perfect. They need time to sort of decompress. I think about it. If you ever read Lois Bujold's Vorkoskin books,
Oh,
um,
I haven't
yeah,
read that.
they're tremendous. I like highly recommend them. They're one of my favorite space opera series of all time. Lois is um so I haven't read Robin Hobb, but I know Robin Hobb is famous for like her character work and all that stuff. And the people who have
Oh
read
yeah,
both
yeah.
compare Lois to Robin Hobb in this respect. I think Lois Bujold is one of the best character writers in science fiction history. Just
Mm.
she has this sort of beautiful way of humanizing even her like nastiest characters. She's just absolutely a tremendous writer, and she does it with like a very like unassuming, understated kind of prose style. It's not very over the top. She'll write like pretty like straightforwardly, and then every now and then she'll hit you with this like really sublime, like beautiful little passage. She's such a great writer. But she has this book, Mirror Dance, which is kind of in a lot of ways the Kingdoms of Death of that series. It's her best novel. It's just so good. It's very dark.
Mm. Mm.
But then the sequel to that is a book called Memory, and Memory, like nothing happens in Memory. Basically, it is like just
Oh,
dealing with the aftermaths of Mirror Dance for all the
yeah.
characters. And like I shouldn't love Memory because like it's basically like a bottle episode, just like nothing really happens. There's a little bit of a mystery at the end of the book. Um,
Mm.
but there's like basically no plot. It's basically all character, and it is beautiful. I think in a lot of ways, I came to think about Ashes of Man as kind of the memory to Kingdoms of Death's Mirror Dance, and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
structurally, that wasn't something I was doing consciously at the time. I thought about this later because there's this whole book in the series, and I think Memory is the second longest of like all of them. There are like 20 of them, and like nothing really happens in it. It's so understated, and but it handles all the grief and the trauma like very humanely. And I tried to do that with Ashes of Man. And then to get right back into it because I had more trauma that I like had written already that I needed to get to. So that all this stuff I was writing was like between two traumas, and life is like that sometimes. But it was harder to write because I had to do more work on it, and because I had to do this weird thing of writing a beginning for a book that's ending already existed, and I had to edit it together. And I hate
Yeah.
revising. I love writing the first draft. I love outlining. Revising. Sorry about the yard work. That's they're doing arts construction actually across the street.
Nah, it's okay.
So I think we're doing it this late your time to avoid the same thing that's happening here. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's no escape. We're literally on opposite sides of the world, and we can't get away from construction. But anyway, Ash's Man is like dead last of the six. It's the hardest one to write for sure.
Mm.
But I actually really like both of them. I think I like Kingdoms of Death better because it's so extreme. It's so dark. It's so apocalyptic. I'm spending a lot of time with aliens too, which is fun for me as a writer. It's hard, but it's very rewarding. And there's a lot of stuff about the sort of deep lore and the deep time of the Sun Eater universe that gets looked at in that book. That's really fun. I like Ashes of Man too because it's so personal.
Yeah.
It's very much about Hadrian and like what he has been through. Uh, but it is, I think, in terms of difficulty, it's my least favorite of the books. Hard for me to rank them in terms of
Yeah.
preference. I think it's probably my second, like towards to the bottom. I think it's Empire of Silence, then Ashes of Man.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'm still very happy with both of the books.
Yeah.
I hate when I rank my own stuff. It sounds like I think some of my own work is bad, and like that's a position you should like never be in as a
Yeah. Yeah.
as an artist, right? You should never say this book is my worst book. But that's sort of you've trapped me, so I will play along. Um, but yeah, no. So I
I
think in terms, oh, go ahead.
now, for what it's worth, I have read only Kingdoms of Death, right? I haven't read Ashes of Men yet, and I have read plenty of books, plenty of big books where it's divided into two. And I always felt the division, but I also did not get that in Kingdoms of Death. I mean, now I know because I've been told about it. But if I didn't know, I would have just accepted it as the right ending for Kingdoms of Death, and it is personally my second favorite of the series. Somehow, out of all the books in the Sun Eater, this one reminded me of Berserk the most.
Yeah, no, they're. So I was always going to do the ending of that book. It was basically always going to happen the way that it did. So this was one of those. I talk about these scenes that like I've known about in some form or other since I was a kid. I knew that I was going to do what I did to a large portion of the cast. I
Yeah.
knew where it was going to happen. I didn't know exactly when in the story it was going to happen because there were
Oh,
lots
okay.
of scenes. So like the Coliseum scene in Demon in White, like I knew I wanted to have that fight scene, but I didn't know in what context that fight scene would happen. Right. So as I'm outlining, I finally realized, oh, I have an opportunity to work the scene that I have in my head in because I want to put all the good scenes in my head into the series. Right. Um, and I'm laughing at Mike's comment. But
Mike, come on.
Mike has this conspiracy theory that Pierce Brown and I are actually the same person. I'm just Pierce Brown in a fat suit. That's my addition to the story. That's not how Mike puts it. But the funny thing about that is I didn't know Red Rising existed until people started to say I was ripping it off. I had never heard of it because I was so out of the loop. I was in my own little corner of publishing, not thinking about the rest of it. Working for Bain, and I'm like, "What is this Red Rising?" I looked at the cover. I thought it had to do with the Russian Revolution at first because it's called Red Rising. It has a sickle on it. I was like,
Yeah.
"What is this? This is about the Romanovs?" But no, it's space Romans again. But Mike keeps roasting me about this. Yeah, no. So the Berserk thing, when I was writing that sequence this time, because it was basically always as I intended it. I was like, what if we just blocked out the sun? Like, what if I did that one? What if I did that one for Miura? May rest in peace. So I just figured, people will probably think it was a reference anyway. So why not just make it? Why not just make it?
That's what I think anyway. I thought that, oh my god, this is happening. This is happening.
Yeah, and it was also like totally in character. That's the sort of thing Sirianni would do. So when I because he already it has already blocked out the sun. Earlier in the series, it does that just to scare people. If you could cause a solar eclipse to intimidate your enemies, wouldn't you? It seemed like the thing to do. But I figured when I was writing that scene, why not? Pour one out for the master, as it were. And so of course he hadn't passed yet when I wrote that, but I thought it'd be the thing to do. I figured if Fullmetal Alchemist could get away with the Berserk reference at the end, why not me? So,
and we have a question for you here. Good afternoon, guys. I have a question for me that I'm dying to know. Do you have any plans to write an epic fantasy?
I do. I do. I don't know when I will do it. It needs to be the right time because I say this all the time. I worry about jumping genres. I know that like a lot of my core readers will follow me, but I worry about the readers who read me because I'm writing space opera, right? Like how many readers will I lose if I change genres? I would say it would be like if Judas Priest made a jazz album, right? Like people would be pissed, right? Because then I would have robbed them of another. We've been robbed of a heavy metal album they could have written for us instead. It would be a great jazz album, but so I always get a little nervous. But I do have a couple epic fantasy ideas that I would like to write. And then I have some more ideas that are maybe less traditional, that are more like even more science fantasy than the Sun Eater is. Something that would feel a bit more like John Carter, like reads like fantasy, right? It's not really a science fiction story. Something that would feel more like that than like Dune or like Star Wars. So really lean on the Japanese influence there, right? Maybe I'll do both of those at some point. We'll see what happens. I don't know what I'm going to do next, except that I plan to write shorter series after this. I'm not going to get into another 7-book deal like right after this. I've got a small child. I intend to have a few more of those. I don't want to be like 5 books deep into Sun Eater 2, right? But the fantasy version, while I'm trying to like deal with 4 children that are all like under 8 or something. I don't know like exactly how many kids we'll have or when. So I'm trying to like sort of plan my writing career to around my life a little bit. So
Well, personally, I think the Sun Eater already kind of feels like epic fantasy anyway in a sci-fi setting. So I mean, there's no complaint for me. I definitely will read them all anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Mike, thank you for the Bradbury comp. That's really kind. Bradbury is one of the goats, as you say. So, sheesh.
Yeah.
No, he's so good.
Yeah, this is my point. I think you already have a ton of fantasy readers.
No, I think that's right. I just get apprehensive. I don't want to like
Yeah.
disappoint the like Sun Eater fans, right?
Yeah, I know.
Because I also like I never intend to leave the Sun Eater universe either, right? Like even after Hadrian's story is done, if I have a science fiction story that can fit in that continuity, and frankly, I have fantasy stories that could fit in the continuity, right? It's bigger than
Oh,
people think it is.
okay.
Um, you know, if I can make it all fit together, I will. I think there's something that's deeply attractive to me as an artist about making the whole thing one big mosaic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like we'll see. There are ways to do it, and I also sort of coming around to like the weirder I can make it while still making it accessible, the better. So like we'll see what happens. But yes, I mean I do have I do have some epic fantasy ideas. I have an abiding love for sword and sorcery. I would love to do something sort of more in that vein too. I think you can probably do that and epic fantasy at the same time. I don't know if we're ever going to see like me write elves, because I feel like I couldn't do better than Tolkien, right? So like, why try to redo Middle Earth exactly? But
Yeah,
you know, um, that's like the one thing though. If I could write in anyone else's universe and anyone else's stories, Middle Earth is the one that I would say yes to. It'll never
yeah.
happen, right? And I hope it never happens. Actually, I really wish they would just leave it alone. I wish people
Yeah,
would.
yeah, yeah.
I wish
Yeah.
people would stop. Like, I will watch the War of the Rohirrim movie because I like Kenji Kamiyama, but I'm not. I'm not watching Rings of Power. Please stop. Cut that out. Please leave Tolkien alone. The Jackson movies are as good as we're ever likely to get. They're not perfect, but just stop. Just
Yeah,
it,
yeah. On
it,
this, I can definitely agree with you, and I do look forward to watching War of the Rohirrim. But other than that, I don't think I can get. I don't think I can do it.
yeah, it just bums me out too much. They're
Yeah, yeah,
just, it's especially when people get like really nasty about Tolkien himself, and they're like, "We can make this better." I'm like, "You can't
yeah,
actually. Like,
yeah.
you're not even close. You're not even close to good enough to make it better." Um, the hubris involved is just so frustrating to me.
Yeah, I,
But
I can agree with that.
yeah,
And I guess we arrive at the final one, which is the upcoming one, and that is Disquiet Gods. Obviously, for this one, many of us haven't read this, but in terms of difficulty and favorite, which one would this be? Because this is the kind of ultimate installment of the series.
yeah, it's my favorite one of the bunch so far. It took me a
Oh,
while to come around to that feeling because it was also as a single book, right? Setting aside publishing complications, it's the most difficult one to write. There is a chapter in this book that took me as long to write as the entirety of the Dregs of Empire, which is my longest novella. It's technically a novel.
yeah,
Uh,
that is not a novella, okay?
yeah, no, I mean, it's longer than the first two Harry Potter books. It is a novel,
Yeah,
but like I call it a novella to not confuse people. It's not part of the main series, right?
yeah, yeah. Okay.
But it took me 2 months to write The Dregs of Empire. It took me 2 months to write one chapter of Disquiet Gods. Uh,
Wow.
it was a complete nightmare, and I didn't do it all at once too. I wrote it and then I abandoned it, and I wrote the rest of the book, and then I came back and tried to fix it, and then I showed it to my editor, and then he came back to me and was like, "Yeah, why don't we do this differently?" And we did some things differently. It was a nightmare. The book was very hard. That's not the only part of the book that was hard to write. There's a lot of stuff that was really difficult
Mm,
logistically or like thematically, because like you don't want to say too much, right? You also don't want to say too little.
yeah, yeah.
We were talking about like From Software as an inspiration. Like I adore the way that they tell story by saying as little as possible, right? Like it's that was very instructive to me as a storyteller, that you can actually not explain things to people and like they will be happier than if you explained it to them, is
Mm,
something that I was really relieved to learn. But it is my favorite of the bunch. It seems to be the early reactions are like mostly it is either their favorite or it is tied with Demon in Light. And if it's not tied, it's like
wow.
immediately after. We've had like I think about 50 people have read it so far, and that seems to be about the vibe. So I'm very happy with that because I feel very strongly that like if the series is finished and Demon in White is everybody's favorite book, then I failed. Because I will have
Yeah.
written 4 books after that that people like less. And if the last 2 books in particular are not considered the
The
best
best.
ones, then the series isn't it didn't become all I wanted it to be. And so
Mhm.
this is not pressure on people listening to lie to me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Don't
but
misunderstand, guys.
yeah, but because I know some of them will for my feelings.
Yeah, yeah.
But because I my readers are cool. But like I really need these last 2 books to be the best ones because they are kind of the story, right? They were the story I wanted to write when I sat down and thought about what kind of science fiction story do I want to write. Oh, it's Disquiet Gods and it's book 7. That is the Sun Eater, right? That's the story. And so I don't want to say the first 5 books were all prologue, but like the first 5 books were all to be able to tell that story with sort of the maximum impact that I could, right?
Damn.
And so I really, really, really hope that when people read Disquiet Gods, which you can read now, if you go to Bane.com, you can
Yeah,
go buy
do that.
their e-arc in early access, basically. And it is essentially final. There might be some like minor typo changes, but it might even be too late to get those in at this point. So you basically are reading the book now. Bane is the only science fiction publisher that sells their advanced copies through like an early access program, and they're a little more expensive than the finished book, but that all goes directly to the publisher and to me. So it's if you support
Mm.
the series or any series that they publish, if there's any other writers that you happen to find and get into that Bane publishes, the best thing you can do to support any Bane title is to buy that advanced copy.
So
It's
by buying the advanced reading copy actually earns you more than when it's
yes,
officially published?
yeah,
Oh, that is
yeah,
interesting.
because they treat it as an ebook. So authors usually, traditionally published authors, get 25% of ebook sales, but because the price is higher, I get more.
Ah,
And
okay.
so it's been possible in the past for Bane's higher earning authors to actually earn out their advances before publication. Uh, Period. So all the day one sales are actually like new royalties instead of against the advance, which is kind of awesome. I don't think I'll
Mm.
quite get there, but it was pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing that they do. Um, Bane did ebooks in the 90s before ebooks were a thing. Um,
Oh,
they used to be one of the top 5 retailers in ebooks in the world. Because some of their writers are early writers that like Jerry Purnell. Jerry Purnell was involved in ARPANET, like he helped create the internet. Uh,
wow.
and so they had people early on they were pretty cutting edge like in the 90s, but they kind of like haven't continued to innovate in exactly the same way. But this is one of the things they did early on that was so cool. They did a lot of things that readers like have asked for as well. They
Uh,
used to include the ebooks with the purchase of the book. They can't do
oh
that
yeah, yeah,
anymore.
please. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
which I
can
know
do it.
everybody wants them to do, right? Like everybody wants books to do that. The reason they can't do that is because of contract agreements with Amazon, basically. And like if you do
Oh.
that, like you won't be, and like this is like at the Penguin level. Like Penguin can't do that because of their agreements with Amazon and things. And so there are like deep structural corporate reasons why this won't happen. But before any of that stuff existed, Bane was doing it because, like, obviously you want the ebook if you buy the book. They used to include in their hardcovers, they had CDs that had all of their ebooks, their entire library, because ebooks were
Wow.
so new that they were trying to
Yeah.
get people to read ebooks. So they were like, I will give you everything we have. To this day, they still maintain a free ebook library on their website. It's usually like firsts in series. I think it's bane.com/free library. I think Lois Bujold's actually in there.
Oh,
If
okay.
you want to check her out, I can't recommend her highly enough.
Mhm.
But they will post editions of their ebooks for free on there. I think it's something like 50 titles. It used to be substantially more, but because of the reconfiguring of publishing and stuff, they had to adapt with the times, and that made them not able to do some of the awesome stuff they used to do. But
Mhm. And
but
while we're on on the topic of ebooks, and I think this is out of your control, but this question has been popping up. Is there a reason why the Kingdoms of Death ebook is significantly more expensive than the others? This is probably more for Amazon Canada.
yeah, that's interesting. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
Oh wait, I actually do know. I know exactly what the problem is, and this is actually something that's worth mentioning to Daw. With the first 3 books in the series, they went down to mass market paperback, and when books drop to
Okay.
mass market paperback and the mass market comes out, the ebook price gets dropped because when publishers put out a book, they always put it out in the premiere format. Almost always put it out in the premiere format first, whether that
Okay.
is hardcover or trade paperback, right? And when they do that, traditional publishers will mark their ebooks to match. Basically, they won't be as much. Obviously, you won't spend $30 on an ebook, but it might be a $15-16 ebook, which frankly I think is too high.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Yes.
I think it's way too high. And so when the mass market comes out, though, they figure, hey, we got all those people who really wanted to read the book earlier at a premium. Now we can drop the price for broader audiences. So, for example, Empire of Silence, I think it was $26 in hardcover when it came out. The ebook, I think, was 14, 15.
Mm.
When the mass market came out, that was $8.99. So the ebook dropped down to something like $8.99. And it's still there. And the same is true for Howling Dark and Demon White. But Kingdoms of Death was never in mass market paperback. It went directly to trade paperback as the backup. And so
Oh.
what I bet happened is when that happened, they didn't drop the price as far. And with Canadian dollars being, more, I suspect that the conversion rate didn't do you guys any favors there. And probably if you look, it's true of Ashes of Man as well. So
Okay. Okay.
so
Okay.
this is where I can say another nice thing about Bane. Bane's ebook for Disquiet Gods at premiere, I think, is $8.99. It might be $9.99. It is their ebooks are substantially cheaper than most publishers' ebooks are. And that's because they feel, as you do, that $15 for an ebook is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
They also don't put DRM on their ebooks like some other publishers do. So you
Wow.
can
This
actually
this
move it
is.
to a new device, and so they Bane's philosophy has always been that readers are not criminals, and we should not treat them as such.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. That's good.
they've been against DRM since DRM became a thing.
Mm.
So fortunately, Disquiet Gods and Book 7, those will not be as expensive, but it might be worth my mentioning to Daw that the prices for 4 and 5 are higher, and we should do something about that. Of course, if I do that, we run the risk of them being like, "You're right, we should make the price of the first 3 go up." So I will think about whether or not I should say anything. But
No, but this is really new information to me. I totally didn't know. I always wonder how they price their ebooks anyway.
yeah, it's in relation to whatever the price of the physical book is at the time.
Okay.
Usually, and I guess this kind of like gets us into like everybody's favorite question, because I saw people ask in the chat a couple times, right? Most books, right, when they're published in their original format, right, because they're basically 3 formats, basically in American publishing. There's hardcover, there's trade paperback, which has a few different sizes, and there's mass market, which really has one size, but there sometimes you see like weird ones.
Yeah.
And like those are in order of expense, right? So when you have a book come out, it used to be the case in like the 90s that like the mass market original was pretty common. Books would come out in mass market. And the reason you do that is you want, like, especially with new writers, is you want the book to be as cheap as possible, because people want the book to be affordable, because
Accessible.
they don't want to
Yeah.
take a risk on a new writer. My first customer experience period as a writer, I was at a convention and we had early copies. This was about 2 weeks before Empire of Silence came out. I had like 20 copies. And I had just gone through doing this big panel where David Drake was there. It was just recently passed. He's a military science fiction writer, great man, really just fascinating guy. He said like nothing but nice things about the book. So a bunch of people were like, oh, we'll come buy it. The first person who got there to look at it, though, saw it was in hardcover, saw the price tag, and said, I don't know who you are. You're not worth this much, and walked away. And that was obviously devastating and like pretty awful of him to say to my face. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like I get it, right? Like if you've not read a writer before and you have a choice between buying a book for $8 and buying a book for 26, like you buy the book for $8, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it used to be that publishers would put out new writers in cheaper formats. Now they've sort of reversed their thinking, and they put out new books in nicer formats. And the publishing kind of goes back and forth. Like they will probably change their mind again in
Mm.
another 10 years, right? They will say this hardcover thing is getting too expensive. we'll switch and we'll do something different, right? Maybe that's not mass markets. Maybe they'll only put the book out in ebook. Like, I don't know, right? They'll do something weird. Because you do see ebook only titles. That's a thing. Maybe that will get more popular. It's just a question of like what the companies think the right thing to do for the bottom line is. But now they think expensive book first, and the people who are really interested in it will buy it, and we can squeeze more money early out of that because we need to recoup our investment faster. Because publishing is like gambling, man. Like it is a really tough business. Most books lose money. I know a certain publisher was audited recently, and I think it was 53% of their authors never earned money.
53.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
wow.
slightly more than half, like never earned money. That's like a pretty extreme case, but in terms of proportion, it's not surprising to me. Houses like Bain, like Daw, are usually the lights are kept on by like their top like 1 to 5 authors, like account for most of their income.
Rothfuss is one of them, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, Rothfuss. I imagine that between Pat Rothfuss and Tad Williams, the two of them probably account for more than half of Daw's revenue. Would be my guess. I'm purely speculating. I'm sure if this gets to Betsy Woltheim, she will tell me I am wrong, right? But like it's probably between 30% and 50%, like just those two writers. And this is normal. Like income in publishing is one of those things that's not normally distributed, right? It's sort of Pareto distributed. So it's like the top 10% is accounting for like more than half of your revenue, basically. So most of your authors like never earn out or barely earn out.
Damn,
so
that's really tough.
It's really that's why like things disappear. That's why they get canceled. That's why they don't get reprinted. It's just like not in the interest of like the business to try again, because they'll lose money. This is not exactly what happened to me, and I kind of don't want to get into the whole Daw situation, but it was a little bit more complicated than that. But like this is why I have so much anxiety about writing long books, because long books are more expensive to print, which means they can't make a longer book like a lot more expensive for you, the reader, right? You might spend $45 on a Brandon Sanderson like normal hardcover at a bookstore, maybe because he's Brandon Sanderson, but the odds of you buying a debut novel in hardcover for $45 are very low, right? It's just not going to happen. Way too much money for like the quality of the product you're getting, and you also like don't know if you like the book, right? So they can make a longer book a little more expensive. Maybe it's $32, maybe it's $33 instead of 30 or 29 using American prices here, but they can't make it much longer, even if the book is twice as long, right? This is why like if they can split the book, they'll do it. But it gets worse because bookstores have to worry about shelf space by the inch. So if you're Barnes and Noble and you see this new book come in that's this big, you might only order one. Where if the book was this big, you might order 3 or 4, which means you can only reach a quarter of the number of customers, which means you print fewer. So the longer the book gets, the fewer books you'll print because you'll have fewer orders, and your profit margin gets worse. So the longer the book gets, the less likely it is to succeed, unless you're a really big deal. This is why I try to tell people who want to be writers, do not do what I did. I did like the worst possible thing you could do as a new writer. I wrote a long book and I wrote a long series, because then the problem there is you have to read 3 books. You have to read 5 books to want to buy Disquiet Gods, right? So like Disquiet Gods is like, that's not actually a very good new release, right? Like if you're a publisher, like, man, would you rather publish book 6 or book 1 of anything? And the answer is you would like never want to publish book 6 ever if you could avoid it. That's why things tend to be trilogies, and they don't tend to be a lot longer than that usually. That's why like there's only one Wheel of Time, right? The only one. And the readers have like a completely. I have this video I want to make about what I call the Brandon Sanderson problem, which is not a dig at Brandon, who I don't know, so I should call him Brandon. But I know people who know him, so I've fallen into this trap. But like it's not about him. It's about the fact that like readers see these like big writers like Brandon Sanderson, like George Martin, like Robert Jordan's Ghost, right? And they think that that's typical. because that's
Yeah.
like the big exemplar of the form. And they think, oh, I'm going to write Wheel of Time too. Actually, like, do the opposite of that, right? Write a standalone novel or write maybe a trilogy. Don't try to write Wheel of Time too, because the odds that traditional publishing can make it happen are virtually zero. They've only managed to make Wheel of Time happen like once. So
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The series itself, it's way too long for its own good.
I've heard that too. So I've never read it because people will tell me, oh, you should read Wheel of Time. There are like 20 of them. I'm like, okay. They're all this long. I'm like, okay. And like from like book 7 to like book, 13, they're kind of terrible. I'm like, why would I ever do that?
I am in that hell right now. I'm on book 9, and it's hell. It's really hell.
I hear it gets way better at the end.
Yeah, I will have to get there.
It's just like people trying to tell me to like watch Lost. They're like, you have to get through 2 seasons of Lost, and then it's amazing. I'm like, I don't have the time. But there are all of these like sort of economic pressures on publishing as an industry. It's very tempting to like look at the companies and say these are the bad guys, and like, man, sometimes they are, right? But a lot of times they just like can't do it. Like just because like they have to keep people employed. I heard anecdotally that I think it was Bantam had to lay people off because Winds of Winter never came in, right? Because they were expecting that money to keep the company moving, right? And like, company's still there, but like, I don't know if that's true. I kind of trust the person who said it. I won't say who it was because it's a name people would recognize. But like, publishers like really struggle to like get stuff done at all. And if they don't have a big title come out in a year, like, it might be a pretty rough year. It's a really, people think these are like really big companies, and most of them aren't. DAW has fewer than 10 full-time employees.
Oh wow, really?
It's a really small company. Bain is also really small. I think Tor has a little bit more than 10, but I don't think it's more than 25. I might be wrong about that. They've got like the whole Tor.com thing going on. Tor is the big one of sort of the like mainline American publishers, but they aren't huge. Wow. These are not like, it's not like IBM or something, right? Now, if you look at like Penguin or Simon and Schuster, right, and you count like all of the like divisions and branches and stuff, like those are bigger companies. But I would imagine that Ace, right, and Ace is like owned by Penguin. That's their science fiction imprint. It used to be its own company, because usually publishing, like, these bigger companies just like Hungry Hippos up all of the smaller companies and like, we'll use you as a brand name, right? And they'll have like a little office that like runs the imprint, right? But I imagine that Ace probably is about the same size as like DAW in terms of staff. I don't think they might have a few more people because they're like Penguin proper, but these companies are very small, and they're like, the reason they don't do a very good job necessarily promoting all their authors is because like maybe there's like one guy whose job is marketing and like he can't do it.
That's impossible.
it is really, really hard. And that's why like I work, so hard promoting myself, because my publishers just like don't have the bandwidth to do it. And it's not in their financial interest to push me when they could be pushing Patrick Rothfuss, who already makes them a lot of money. And it's easy to make a lot more money if you're already making a lot of money. Like, that's just, like a truism of economics. So yeah, it's a rough business. It really is. I get why people like to think it's like, the artists versus the companies, but often the companies just can't hack it. They do their best, but
wow, insane. But I'm happy that Sun Eater is now thriving, right? I'm going to assume that 2023 is probably the best year for you, right?
It was my best year, and it's funny because I didn't even have a new book come out, so I kind of think this will be even better. There's a lot of stuff going on this year, but last year, Ashes of Man just barely came out at the end of 2022. So the only new things I had were a new short story collection ebook and The Dregs of Empire, and that was like right at the end of the year. So most of the year being good was down to like folks like you. It was down to you. It was down to Daniel Green. It was down to like BookTube sort of coverage generally, and folks getting excited about the books. It wasn't because something happened, because usually like nothing sells old books like new books. Like if every time a writer has a new book come out, it's an opportunity not just for readers to like remember that like, oh, Sun Eater exists, but like if I had another series, my publisher would be reminding the sales force, like, hey, Christopher has all these old books. You should maybe like think about bringing those back into print, right? And like promote those. So if I'm like David Weber and I have like a new Honor Harrington book coming out, and they like, remember, he also wrote fantasy books. Like, you should like get those back into stores right now because people might be excited about this potential New York Times bestseller. And, maybe you can move some other books. So like none of that was happening. Last year was like all down to just people being excited, which was really, really cool.
Well, I'm certainly happy because this is, from my own perspective and my own selfish reason, deserves more success.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think things are getting a lot better as far as people, reading my books and being excited about them is concerned. Especially in the last couple of months, it would have been better if the books didn't, run out of print.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Again, Empire of Silence spent, I think, about 6 of the last 12 months unavailable in North America. I saw some people asking about this. Like, period. You could only buy the ebook or the audiobook. There was no paperback. There were no hardcovers, obviously. And there will probably never be hardcovers. This is another thing. Most publishers, Dawn told me, like, the only writers we keep in print perpetually in hardcover are Tad Williams and Patrick Rothfuss, right? For the reasons I'm sort of outlining. Their fear is because you have to print thousands of books, right? Whether that's 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever, right? In order to make the per unit cost that you spent go down, right? Because you want to spend as little money on each copy as possible. And so to do that, you need to print a lot of them. But then if nobody buys them, they sit in the publisher's warehouse and the publisher gets charged rent per copy. And so all these books that don't get bought just cost them more money every month. And their fear is that, like, if the books don't sell fast enough, that they'll be stuck with this bill they can't fit. And then what they end up having to do is sell the books to a wholesaler and like barely break even. And so that's the fear. They so like in my case, right? I don't think that DAW has been paying very much attention to the momentum gain, despite my efforts to try and communicate it to them. And they're looking at my numbers generally, and they're saying, well, like, I don't know that we could print enough to justify it, right? And now, like, if they would like look up from the rap sheet, they could see that like actually the audience like might be there. Nice.
It is there.
I was reading the comment, but like if they would look up, they could see that like the interest is actually probably there. It's just not represented in the numbers because there aren't books for them to buy, especially in the last year, because the first book hasn't been available kind of at all. It went out of print in June. The mass market sold out. And then the soonest they could get a trade paperback launched was September. So I didn't have any of book one for 3 months, as you know. And then because of your review and because of Daniel's review, what they had printed vaporized basically overnight. Amazon like lost all the copies, and they're as far as I can tell, I think there are like 10 somewhere in the continental US, like on bookstore shelves somewhere, because the number that have sold according to my numbers is not a round number, and it is 10 short of a round number. So I think there are 10 books that have not been bought. So good luck. They're out there somewhere, guys. I remember I was on tour with my friend DJ Butler in 2019. We went all up the West Coast, and this was well after Empire of Silence hardcovers were gone. And I found one in a store in like Oregon, and I was like, "This is mine now." So I bought my own book because like they were gone. But they sometimes will still be in stores somewhere. But DAW is convinced that they won't be able to make up the sales, and I have not been able to convince them for 5 years to give it a shot. And so I just don't think the hardcovers are going to happen, which is why I did the diamond editions. Is why I'm doing the Andera Books editions. I know special editions aren't a replacement for regular hardcovers, but it's the best I can do. So
insanity, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. I just saw Belemri say the trade paperbacks got restocked. I need to go see if that's true real quick. This is big news.
Oh, it is? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it looks like it. Although it might be. Yeah, it looks like it, but it doesn't have a Prime sticker on it, so maybe it's used. I have to double check. But if they're back, that's great. They were supposed to be this week. They will be back, so we'll see how quickly BookTube can eat them all.
Okay, look,
Again.
for those of you who watch my channel, I know I got a lot of comments on this. So this is the sign, okay? The trade paperback is back. I've been getting questions on when is it coming back? When is it coming back? I don't know.
Yeah, it was supposed to be by the end of January. So if it's not today, it should be tomorrow. But like let's add a. I know Blemmer just said it just came back today. So they told me last week that they had printed and they were shipping to the warehouse. So they said it would be this week. So
Mm,
to Chris's question, yes, if you want to write dog books, a polite email, emphasis polite, because it doesn't do me good for my readers to bully my publisher, and say, hey, I would really like to buy Empire of Silence in hardcover. Would you kindly consider doing a reprint? I think if they get a few hundred of those, they might get the message. Maybe. I can't promise anything, but if you all
yeah.
want to try to write them emails,
Ti-
you
Title
know,
your email the Cielcin or Mericani, and they will get the message.
yes, yeah, well, yeah, don't threaten to skin them and wave their skins from flags, and that would be bad. So don't do that. But yeah, no, if you want to write them, if you would like to tweet at them, whatever, again, politely, um, you know, just so that they know that people want them, and would buy them, because I think one of the things that traditional publishers haven't quite cottoned on to yet is that for a lot of people, books are becoming like printed books are becoming a luxury item,
Yeah.
and because they can just read books in audio or digitally casually. So if they buy a physical book, they want it to be halfway decent. That doesn't mean they want to spend $100-$200 necessarily, or like some of these small press, like luxury edition companies are getting crazy, like $2,000. Excuse me, that's insane.
Yeah, yeah, I
um
know.
i I mean, I get it, like hand craftsmanship, it's very hard to put a fair price on stuff like that, and have people be able to buy it. I remember watching a video about this mansion down in Miami, I think, his old Spanish house. And they're like, you literally can't pay someone to make a carved wood ceiling like this anymore. It's impossible. It's so
Yeah.
expensive. We just can't, as a civilization, produce them anymore, right? Which is so sad, right? It's one of the
Yeah.
reasons that they're just everything is uglier than it used to be. But like the same problem, right? With books, right? You can't like necessarily buy $200, but you spend $200 on a book, but maybe you can spend 35, right? And so people, I think, are more likely to buy a print book if it's a hardcover these days than if it's a paperback. But I don't think the publishers have noticed that yet. Um,
Mm.
you know, so yes, I know,
It's
Zen.
really
I know.
it's really weird though, because I mean this question is already correct. Your book sold out in 1 hour. The first 500, right?
The first 500
I
did,
think
yeah.
it was in an hour. I got the copy of that.
Okay, so they didn't even know that it had happened. I spoke to them recently, and they were like, "How did that go?" And I'm like, "Well, here's your money." But yeah, it went fine. Thank you. But they didn't see how fast it went. I when I spoke to them, they didn't know that I had sold the books, that the other books, to Bain. They had no idea. They just weren't paying attention to what had happened.
My
Um,
God.
they had stuff going on, like the company had been bought, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
like there's a lot of like internal problems they have to sort out, and stuff like that. And they got to take care of, like, all that stuff. I don't blame them for, like, business is business, right? But and it's not like I'm the center of the world either, right? So the fact they didn't know, like, is forgivable. But I was a little surprised they like didn't have any idea. So they don't know. I told them like how well it went, but it's one of those things, I think, that just isn't going to register. So I think the only thing that might persuade them is to hear from readers and to hear from as many of you as possible. So if you want the hardcovers, I can't guarantee it'll work, but
Yeah.
the only thing that might work is for people to politely write to Daw and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I would love to buy them." Um,
Do that, y'all.
yeah, so give it a shot, because I personally, it makes me very angry that the used copies are $200. I don't like that for people. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's I don't think it's reasonable. Now, I like, if there was another option for the first editions to be $200 used, fine, right?
Mm.
Like, that's kind of cool, right? But if that's the only option, and you've got, like, I get emails sometimes from, like, 18, 19-year-old kids who like the books and they want the hardcovers, and they're like, man, is there anything I can do? I really want to buy this book. Like, it makes me angry that kid can't, right? And but I can't induce the publisher to do something they think isn't in their interest. And Um, and I don't blame them because they need to keep the lights on for their own employees. Like those are also people who like deserve to like have jobs and be taken care of. So it's difficult sometimes. These are just
Yeah.
insoluble problems, and I did the best I could. I made the diamond edition cheaper than the used books. Which I didn't have
Oh
to do, but I thought that would be a good thing to do. So and Derrida Books version, when it comes out, which will be probably November, we'll get another number of copies out. I think it's probably going to be 750 numbered and like 78 lettered, I think is the plan.
757. Ah, okay.
But those will still be about the same price as the Diamond Edition. They'll be different, but they'll be cheaper than the used books. So you've got that going for you. So
That is such a sad situation.
it's really deeply frustrating to me. It's to the point where like I make like once a year I make a video answering the where are the hardcovers question. And now of course there are a lot of new people who are interested, so they don't know. So I make a video, but like I really, if there's one question I could like never answer again in my life, it's where are the hardcovers?
Yeah, I bet you get that question a lot.
It's so frustrating. I feel like it's very easy to understand why other writers get very angry at their readers for asking questions like, where is book 7, right?
Yeah.
Where is it? Because they feel like they've answered it all the time. That it doesn't. Like it's very unnatural to speak to thousands of people, right? Like it's not something the human body, the human brain is designed for. And so you feel like you've answered this, but like I waited tables for 7 years, so I'm used to answering the same stupid questions about spaghetti in a way that I think a lot of writers aren't. And so when people are like, where are the hardcovers? I'm like, oh man, okay. Like they're right here at the spaghetti. Let me get them. Yes, you can have a straw. Holy cow. Like why do you need a straw? But it's gonna end up in the ocean. Cut it out. But here you go. Right. So I'm kind of, I think I have a higher tolerance for it, but like, man, is very frustrating when I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And I very much try to subscribe to like the old Disney model of customer service and not say no. But I think in the case of the hardcovers, the probable reality is unless you all can email them into submission politely, then
Politely.
I don't know that there's anything that's going to be done about it until I can get the rights back. So
Yeah, really tough situation.
yeah,
And
it's rough.
I actually think, yeah, as you said, probably they don't pay attention to this, but really a special edition and this kind of stuff is really rising right now. Yeah.
Well, this was oh, my mom's in the chat. Hi, Mom. But
Your mom? Hold on,
yeah.
hold on. Oh, Penny Ruocchio.
Yeah. Hi, Mom. She's downstairs. She's just watching the baby for me. But yeah, no. So yeah, she's also right. Book 7 will be 2025. It'll probably be like September-ish is the guess. I've written, but this is a bit of a segue, but my mom can derail us. That's fine. I've written about 15 chapters of book 7. They're probably around 70. So that's about a fifth of the book. I had to take a break because I owe, I think, 4 short stories to different people. So I think most of February is going to be not writing book 7, which is kind of a bummer. But I was getting kind of stuck anyway. So it's nice to take a break and change gears. I have done one Kickstarter. We did a Kickstarter for a limited edition of Empire of Silence. I got a license to do 1,000 copies. And that went very, very well. I would love to do more stuff. With the subsequent books, they probably won't be Kickstarters. Because the people
happen, sorry,
because Petrik bought a copy of book 1 through the Kickstarter, and he deserves the right to have first shot at book 2. So with the subsequent books, we'll open it up to people who bought their book 1, and then if people don't buy it, then we'll put their copies up for sale. Steve is building a website for Diamond Editions, which he's like,
oh, that will be great.
He's got because he's going to do some other stuff. He's got the rights to Lyric Korea's Monster Hunter series. He's going to do that, which is no relation to the books, the video games rather. Totally unrelated.
Monster Hunter.
He's not a video game guy. He didn't know. and then he's got a couple others in the works. So he's going to be doing a bunch of other writers. I will be the original Diamond Edition author, so that's cool. So we're going to do those, and we're going to do we'll do Kickstarters probably for my short story collections, because short stories are like not very commercially viable in like a bookstore setting. With a couple exceptions, they're very hard to like make those earn out. So I'll probably kickstart the short story collections. So we'll have those coming up in the next couple of years.
I see. This is a good one.
For this don't believe. Yeah, okay. So this is extra work for me, but Fad here asked a question. The best thing that you can do if you live in a country where you cannot purchase my independently published stuff, the novellas, the short story collections, email me and I can totally work it out for you. So no problem at all. We can send you some files. Probably I should just find a way to sell them through my own website. That's probably
do that.
I would need to take them off Kindle Unlimited because Kindle Unlimited is like a non-compete thing. But if I do, I can at least put the novellas up. I'm working right now on remastering the novellas because the freelance copy editors I paid for the first two novellas did not do a very good job. And they need to get cleaned up. And I'm also getting new covers made because the Queen of Ashes print on demand edition right now has art from Shutterstock, because I was given like a week's notice from Recorded Books to get the book out in print, because they're like, we're going to put it up on audio. And I'm like, I need to put it up in print. Holy cow. I didn't know it was going to be this fast. So I need to get an actual cover made. That should be done in the next couple weeks. Got a guy in the Philippines called John Barry Ballaran, who did the cover for The Dragons of Empire, who is redoing my other novella covers. So those will get up. Maybe after I do that, I'll put up
You got number 69.
Yes, yeah, Zin asked for it. So
Good job.
we did entertain number requests. There were some people who wanted specific things for whatever reason. In Zin's case, because he's a dork, and we granted as many requests as we could. There were some people who like signed up, who were like number 500 in the backer list. They're like, "Can I have number one?" And I'm like, "No."
No.
Number one is number one. Actually, number one got letter A, I think, actually, because the first person was a lettered edition buyer. But yeah, if you want to buy the self-published stuff and you live in a country that will not allow you to do that, I can email them to you. That's fine.
And speaking of Kickstarter earlier, how is the progress? It's going well?
Yes. Yeah. So we got slowed down because we are using the same bindery as a certain author whose name is something like Brambigan's Mamberton. And Brandon Sanderson was publishing his new thing, right? Is it Words Radiance he's doing?
Yeah.
So we're using the same printer because Steve Diamond is actually the guy who introduced Dragonsteel to this printer in the first place. Steve's been doing deluxe editions for years, and he actually helped them get that set up, if I understand the story correctly. And so the Diamond edition got slowed down by a couple things. Originally, Taryn Fiddler, who's doing the interior arts, took a couple months longer to finish everything, which we asked him to draw a lot. There are 11 black and white interiors in the book, and Taryn, was a pretty detailed, serious artist, right? It took him a while, and he had some other stuff that was slowing him down. Then the calligrapher took longer to deliver some of the detailed art for the interior that we wanted, and that took longer than we thought. And then Brandon Sanderson had his, I think it's Words of Radiance special edition getting printed, and so we had to wait for the printing press to be done. Because that was obviously more money and so more important to the printer than us. So Brandon Sanderson slowed me down, which is funny because there were a couple people who were like, "Christopher, when are you doing book 2? Can you please hold off? Don't print it until after I bought Words of Radiance." And I'm like, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to do my own thing. I literally published a novella the same day Pat Rothfuss published his by accident because I wasn't paying attention. And it was fine. It did not hurt my sales. I have a business sort of philosophy in my head that when I'm thinking about scheduling things, I'm the only science fiction writer. I don't care what the other ones are doing. It'll be fine. I can't live my life, around the rest of the industry. I need to do my own thing. And but then I ended up like slowed down anyway because Brandon Sanderson stole my printing press. And so they are printing literally now. Steve had got the templates for the cover boards for the foil stamps delivered yesterday. There was a problem; some of the details were too small, so we had to make one of the images bigger.
Mhm.
And so we got those done. So I think the covers are printing now. I think the interiors might already be done. My
Okay.
hope is that by like the middle of February, I will have them and we'll be able to start sending out the people's books who did not have slipcases, because the slipcases can't get made until the finished book exists, because you really
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
have the actual book to make sure the fit is right. And so sometime in the next couple of weeks, my wife and I will have to design the foil stamp templates for the slipcase and the tray
yeah.
case. And once that's done, last night we designed the inserts for the inside of the tray case, because when you open the book, right, the inside of the boxes on the case will have art in them. They're just little. They're not like illustrations. They're just little things. But we had to design those last night. So it's all coming together. The posters and the canvases are printed for people who ordered those. The canvases
Mm.
need to go get signed. I need to pick them up. Place here in town, so I'm physically picking them up and mailing them to Steve. So that's like my next thing. I need to get those moved off, and then we were going to put out the ebook which just has the new material. It doesn't have Empire of Silence in it. It's just the new intro and the new story that you won't be able to read anywhere else for a few years. And the artwork. But we were going to put it out first, but then we realized if we did that, we would be spoiling the artwork for people who bought the books. Which, like, everybody who
Mm.
bought the book got the stories early in the ebook, right? But this way, as soon as we get the books delivered, I think we'll get the ebook together and sent out, because that way we can put all the art in it. And once people start getting the books, that way people aren't left out. I think that timing will be better, because I'm trying to like I want everyone to be as happy as possible.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to like make compromises, but I think if I wait on the ebook delivery a little bit, then people can see the books early. But then the people who don't get the books yet because they're waiting on slipcases is a whole thing. And then we'll get Howling Dark probably up for pre-order around May. Steve needs to finish his website and get that ready, but around May we'll reach out to people who bought the Diamond Edition of Book 1 and say, hey, Book 2 is ready. Like, I don't know exactly how it's going to work to make sure that people can't snipe you, but Steve's got that worked out somehow. There'll be something like you'll get like a code or something that you have to enter. I don't know what the plan is, but we'll make sure that you don't lose your copy, and we'll obviously be checking orders against the names from people who bought the first one and make sure everything's fine. And so you'll have like a month if you bought that book to buy the second book and so on.
And the prices will be similar.
For the sequel, yeah, it'll probably go up a little bit because the book is longer, so that there's more paper involved. So it might be like 120 or something, but it won't be. It's not going to be like $500 or something.
Yeah, please don't.
that would be unforgivable. No, I would never do something like that. Unless like paper actually got 5 times more expensive. Can you get the short story ebook if you didn't do the Kickstarter? Probably not. Just because it's going to get logistically complicated, and I don't want to just find a way to do that. But if you're worried about missing out, so here's probably like, this may be getting a little too into the weeds, but I already have enough short stories now from Tales of the Sun Eater 1, 2, and 3, the ebooks, to do an omnibus of all of my short stories. So as soon as book 7 is done, all of my short stories that currently exist will go into a single volume of all my short stories, and we'll probably kickstart that. And that'll be me and Steve, so it'll match the Diamond editions. But all the Diamond editions have new stories in the back of them, and all of the UK and Derrida book special editions are going to have different short stories in all of them. So they'll be like Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue. I think I told you this joke. So they'll have like, you can get Growlithe in one, you can get Vulpix in the other one, so they'll have different stories. So by the time I reprint special editions, 2 special edition sets of the series, I'll have 14 more stories. And so I'll do a second volume of these stories at the end of that project. So it will be possible for everybody to get to stories eventually. It's only a question of when. So
I think that is important. I think that is very important.
Yeah, I'm not going to permanently paywall anything or gate off anything. But I will. Sorry, comments are. Come on, you wish. But But no, so eventually people will be able to read everything. So some of the stuff will just be early. Now, as far as the artwork is concerned, I have not quite decided what we're going to do with that yet. Some of it will release on the internet so people can see it after. But for example, like the lettered editions have an extra color piece in them that James Cook did. That's just a secret. If the lettered edition people want to put that out, they can. It's on them. But that's for them because they spent all that extra money for an extra picture and some other things.
Yeah.
But like we're not going to publish that. So some of it will be kept secret for now. Some of it will some of it will put out just I've revealed a couple of the other pieces in different places. I think like my Discord avatar is actually a Diamond Edition sneak peek.
I don't think you need to worry about this though. Usually, when it comes to the matter of interior artworks, all of them usually readers tend to rebuild them anyway on the internet.
Yeah,
Usually
they'll
after they get
turn
the
up.
book.
Yeah,
They will turn up. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, they'll be in there. But we wanted the people who bought the books to be able to see them first, like it's like Christmas,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so a lot of the stuff we kept secret. Of course, a lot of the artwork in the Diamond Edition was sponsored by readers. They picked the scene. They they worked with me on the descriptions that I sent to the artist. They reviewed the sketches. They altered the sketches. They had input, which was really, really fun. And that's something we will do with the Diamond Editions moving forward. As well. So a bunch of the people asked if they could do it again next time, and I said sure. So it'll probably be a lot of the same people, but there's some other people who might get a shot at it too. And that's been really fun. Like I said, I love doing the art direction stuff. So getting to work with people who love the books in a lot of ways more than me, has been really fun.
I have just begun doing art direction with the broken binding, and yeah, it is certainly a fun experience, and I can kind of understand that.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I also like I have such a poor people never believe me when I say this. I have a really poor like visual imagination. Like I can't really see things very clearly in my head. I think very, very much like in words. And so
really?
yeah, and so when I give Kieran a like 2-page description of something, and then he gives me back a picture of what I was talking about, I get to see it kind of for the first time. And like that's really fun. And like I know when it's wrong. I know when something's like, oh, that's not exactly what I'm envisioning, even though I'm not literally envisioning anything. I'm like, that is not the word for like the color red that I had in mind when I was talking about Valka's hair. Can we please change that? Right. So it's very strange. It's very strange being inside my head for a lot of reasons, but that's one of them is
I am going to read that. Okay. I'm going to do it.
Oh man, it's so good. It's so good.
Actually, got the Folio Society edition as well, but I haven't read the series yet. Someone, plenty of booktubers gave that to me, and I hope to read that as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's my favorite science fiction series. I think Wolf is the greatest science fiction writer of all time. Period. I think he just in terms of his actual like control of language and his craft and his like compositional skills in terms of like outlining and world building and all of that stuff. He oh wow, we start talking about Wolf the minute Severian himself shows up.
Severian.
Good to see you. The autarch himself is present. Awesome. But it's just I've said before, I think one definition of a perfect book is a book from which removing any single word would make the book worse. And I think Book of the New Sun is one of those books. It's not the only one, but I think if you took anything out of that book, you would damage it. I'm talking about Gene Wolfe, Atomic Rooster. Gene Wolfe is
Gene Wolfe. Gene Wolfe is the author behind.
He's my favorite. He's my favorite writer. Tolkien like wins for like nostalgia reasons and because I think the sort of spirit of Tolkien is something that I feel more strongly in my own life than Wolfe. But I think Wolfe is the better like writer, technically speaking, if that makes sense. I think Book of the New Sun is a like greater artistic and in a sense engineering accomplishment. Like it's just so tightly wound. It's like reading a clock. Like it's just beautiful. And so is Tolkien, but like Tolkien is a very different experience. Like I can think of ways that I would have wanted Lord of the Rings to maybe be different. I would mostly I just want it to be longer. I would read 20 books of Lord of the Rings. But like with Wolf, I think Book of the New Sun is perfect. It's very difficult It's not an easy series to read by any
Yeah.
means. It's not an easy series to fully appreciate. It's kind of a meme to compare things to Dark Souls, but in terms of tone, actually, like if From Software were to purchase the rights to Book of the New Sun wholesale and just adapt it, it would be a
Yeah.
pretty good fit. Like they wouldn't have to change the tone at all. Um,
Wow.
but it feels very much like a From Software kind of universe. Or rather, I guess From Software feels like a Gene Wolfe thing. But it's also difficult in that it like hides things, and it like kind of tricks you as a reader, and you have to like really work at stuff. And
Mhm.
I find that very rewarding. It's sort of like trying to read like classic literature, like trying to read one of the Greek playwrights or Shakespeare, or it's like trying to read scripture. Like there's like a whole industry of trying to understand Wolfe,
Yeah.
that's sort of separate from reading Wolfe itself. It's there's really nothing like it. I say all the time I want to be like Wolfe when I grow up. Um,
It
you know.
that really sounds like something from software games. You have to really work things out.
Yeah, it's not obvious, right? Like my
Yeah.
favorite example is like there's a character who is a robot, and it takes you 4 books to realize that's true, because he doesn't just come out and say this man was a robot, because the character doesn't know what a robot is.
Oh.
And so he's like, yeah, he like moved funny, and like the way he like talked, he like angled his face, and the way that it caught the light kind of imitated expressions. And you're like, what the hell is he talking about? And then you realize later that he's like moving like C3PO, right? And you're like,
Ah.
oh, that's really cool. But like, he doesn't just come out and tell you because he's like too good a writer for that. So, yeah, I won't tell you which character that is. Atomic
Yeah, yeah.
Rooster over here is like spoilers, but like, spoilers. There's a robot in a science fiction novel. It'll be okay. I promise.
And
Uh,
also, kind of Book of the New Sun is something that, as far as I know, is something that you have to kind of read twice, not only once, because it's just impossible to understand everything.
Yeah, although I think you can read it the first time and think this is a very like weird, interesting world with very strange characters, and like it's got giants and robots and like a UFO and a guy with 2 heads and like a sword fights and a monster that like hunts by eating dead people and then using their voices to trick their friends into coming into its trap, right? And there are sorcerers and spaceships and ray guns, and like it's cool, right? But it's also like this very obscure, dense, like literary thing, and there really, like I could say again, there's nothing like it. It's
Yeah.
so good.
Well,
Um,
I guess after I'm caught up with Sun Eater, maybe that's what I will read next.
it's great. I can't recommend it highly enough. It does read like a sword and
Mm.
sorcery novel the first time through, but then you read it the second time, and then it's like you've played Dark Souls, and then you go watch a bunch of lore videos, and you're like, oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
right,
did
like
that.
like that's what that was about. It's a very similar feeling, right? I know that this is the Dark Souls of books is like a meme, right? But like it does, I think, merit that comparison. Um, and I think people who like that
Yeah.
engaging with Dark Souls, right? Engaging with Elden Ring, and thinking about stuff like you do with those games, I think would like reading these books and would like engaging with them in the same way. I think it's you develop a similar relationship to Wolf that you do with a game like that, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. It's kind of a cringe comparison because everything's been compared to Dark Souls,
Yeah.
um, but I think I think it deserves it. So
Do you think Book of the New Sun will be published today? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think that Book of the New
Yeah.
Sun. I think Wolf's sort of success is largely a product of his relationship with David Hartwell, who was his editor. And
Um,
Man, this is one of those things trying to get me in trouble. I broadly think that the previous generation of science fiction fantasy editors were better just across the board.
mm,
I think
mm,
that the current generation of editors, with a couple exceptions, are inferior as editors in essentially every way. I just don't think that they
mm.
have received the same sort of grounding and education and rigor that the previous generation. I also don't think they had to work as hard. Like publishing, science fiction publishing used to be like a really tough business. Like, in the same thing with American comics. Like this is a weird thing, but they were like very closely associated with organized crime in like the 60s and 70s. Stephen King's agent was his cocaine dealer. And
Oh,
like it was a very different and like uglier world, and like people had to
yeah.
like work harder to be in it. And I think that when that's true, I think you care more. Which is a weird thing to say, but I also separately, I just think that like the individual people who were editors, we're talking like Donald Wollheim, right? Like Betsy Mitchell, oh gosh, I can never remember what her first name was. We were Del Rey, but like Jim Bain, like Tom Doherty, and like David Hartwell, right? Like I think that these editors had distinct sort of character and vision. And Hartwell in particular, like Hartwell was like a writer's editor, right? Like he really believed in Gene Wolfe. Like Gene Wolfe was never like a huge commercial success. Like he was always kind of a sleeper hit, right? And
Ah,
Hartwell like advocated for him because he was a great writer and needed to be published, right? Which is not to say that Gene like didn't make a living at this, right? But like there were a lot of writers who like made similar amounts of money who like didn't last, right? And largely that was because of Hartwell's, I guess, patronage in a sense, right? And I think it
mm,
would take someone with the dedication and to the craft and the vision of an editor like Hartwell to keep someone like Wolf around now. And I just don't think that I don't think David Hartwell exists anymore. I don't think that
mm.
editor is around. In a lot of ways, I look at like the editorial scene and I feel like Sam watching the elves leave Middle Earth. Like it just like
What?
a lot of the new ones I just don't I just don't think are up to this is again this is gonna be in trouble. But like I you know there's not to say there aren't great editors now, but like in general I feel the caliber has decreased. um
Obviously, this is not encompassing everyone. Okay, to those watching, this is
yeah,
just
of course not. This is not a
yeah,
blanket statement. Like there
yeah,
like I mean, for example, like I'm biased because he is my friend, but DJ Butler, Dave Butler, edited Disquiet Gods. He's also a
yeah.
writer, but he used to be an editor for Wordfire Press, which is Kevin J. Anderson's like little small company that he owns, and he started doing consulting work for Bain. And Dave is one of the smartest people I know. Period. Like he's
Mm.
actually a genius. He speaks like 15, 16 languages. Like he's just
Wow, seriously?
completely, yeah, oh yeah, no, seriously. Like he's not like conversant in all of them, but like he can basically read and translate like that many languages. A lot of them are dead languages. Dave taught himself Ojibwe, which is a Native American language, so that he could write Witchy Eye, which is his fantasy novel that's set in America. And like I don't know another writer, even writers of Native descent, who taught themselves a whole new Native language, that they didn't know in order to write the characters better. Dave did.
Oh,
And he knows he can read like Middle Egyptian, right? And but he like also like is fluent in Italian and like I think German, and I think he knows some Spanish. Like I think he told me it was like 15 languages. He thinks he knows Greek and Latin, right? He's a brilliant guy, right? And like he like really like understood what I was doing with Disquiet Gods in a way that like I had not had an editor really engage with the book before, and that was a really like great experience, working with him. And like obviously he is my friend, so like I am biased, right? But like he's great. And like there are other great editors out there. I but there are a bunch of new ones that I just don't think are like, I don't think they have the clarity of vision. Like Hartwell, Hartwell like got weird stuff. A lot of the weird stuff that Tor was putting out in like the 80s, 90s, like those were Hartwell's books, right? Hartwell passed away in like the last decade. Um, you know, so like these things are sort of, things are changing. Like there's a lot of turnover in the industry, and um, there's I think a sense that like the only qualification one really needs is like to like fantasy and science fiction and to like be able to like know what to do with a comma, and like that's not it, right? Like there's something else. There's a reason like that like Fitzgerald and Hemingway like were both great writers, and that reason is they were both edited by Maxwell Perkins, right? Like he
mm,
left an impact on those writers because he himself really understood literature, and he understood those writers as writers and their visions, and was able to help make them better. And I don't think that I think Maxwell Perkinses are pretty rare. Like I don't think publishing like has a lot of those as a rule anyway. But ZOMG Fantasy over here is saying, like, it's hard to find a good freelance editor. Like you'll find people who will like read the book and like maybe they'll fix some commas, but maybe they won't do a great job. Like even finding a good copy editor is hard because the general standards of like grammar education in America at least are like plummeting. People like don't know what to do with a semicolon. You know, and like again, it is tricky. Like semicolons are like not bad. Like commas are hard. Semicolons pretty easy, but like people don't know, you know, and so there's an educational issue too with regard to stuff like that. It is a little bit dismal, you know, and so it can be difficult, but you know.
I mean, even in conversation, something as simple as your still get mistaken a lot.
It's not the way it's not the way that it used to be. You know, I say this all the time. Like the sort of classical education in the Western tradition, right? Like grammar, rhetoric, and logic are like the three foundational subjects, and we like barely teach grammar anymore. Like people don't know what rhetoric even is, right? They use the word rhetoric, and they're like, oh, that's what politicians do when they're trying to trick you. And I'm like, well, yes, but also no. You know, it's a little bit more than that. So, yeah. So I think the thing with Wolf is that there just isn't a Hartwell there. I don't think that there's an editor that could or would fight for Gene Wolfe as hard as David Hartwell did.
But even like Gene Wolfe, there is still the sequel series, right?
There are two. Yeah, there's Book of the Long Sun. There's Book of the Short Sun. There's a sequel novel as well, Earth of the Long Sun, which I kind of count as part of New Sun. Wolfe didn't want to write it because he felt like it explained too much. I think it's awesome. They like, hey, will you write a sequel and like, can you actually like clarify some of the mysteries? You can think of it as DLC. It's sort of DLC to the main series, but I think it's the best one of the five. I think it's great. Book of the Long Sun is amazing. It's set in the universe, but it's like very far removed from the action of the series. I have not read Short Sun yet because it is famously the hardest of the three of them to understand. And so I've been sort of holding it off. Yeah. And I've also been rationing my Wolf supply because he's passed, and so I have a finite supply of new Gene Wolfe that I can read. So I'm kind of spreading it out over my life here. But yeah.
Yeah, it is mega successful right now in terms of sales.
That's the thing, is that like quality is like no indicator of success, right? And success is no indicator of quality. But and that's fine. Like I don't need everything to be great, right? Like Lord knows, I'm like watching the original run of Pokemon right now, just because like I thought that would be a fun thing to do, and like it's not like there's some really good episodes surprisingly for like you know, the first episode actually goes it is pretty deep for a little kid's show, right? But like a lot of those episodes are completely disposable, right? Like you don't need to really watch them, and that's fine. Like not everything needs to be high art or great, but it does feel like the mechanisms for promoting and supporting writers like Gene Wolfe like aren't really around to the same extent that they used to be.
There's a lot of element to this, and well, what can we do? Time keep on changing.
All you can do is adapt or die. Right? We're all stuck with the sort of Darwinian problem at the end of the day, and so you know, that's not going anywhere. It wouldn't matter if I was a writer or not. Like I would have to adapt to something. So anyway, don't mean to be like too hard on that, but
so let's go to the last question, and then we'll call this interview a day.
Okay, sounds
Final
good.
ranking.
Final ranking. Okay. In terms of difficulty, first, the most difficult book was Ashes of Man as a consequence of the split. Then Kingdoms of Death also as a consequence of the split.
Makes sense.
And then Disquiet Gods, which was just hard on its own. Then Empire of Silence, because I did not have a mechanism for writing yet. I hadn't figured out my process. Then Demon in White, and then Howling Dark is the easiest book to write.
There you go. Yeah.
and then as far as like my sort of general sense of like which books I think are the best, I think Empire of Silence is the least good, then Ashes of Man, then Kingdoms of Death, and then it's like pretty close to a tie for me between Demon in White and Howling Dark. But let's say then Demon in White, then Howling Dark. I like Howling Dark better. And just personally. And then I think
Yeah.
Disquiet Gods is the best of the 6 of them so far. I hope when I'm
Awesome.
done that I can just put book 7 at the top of the list and just keep the list the same. That's my goal. I want book 7 to be the best one. So,
And I truly wish you will achieve that.
yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we like got way out into the weeds on all sorts
Yeah.
of things, but I hope I covered everything. You know,
It was fun. It was really fun. And to end this interview, when can we probably expect the book 7?
book 7 probably will be for sale around September of next year, so September 25. I'm hoping to finish it by July, August of this year. But then we've got to edit it and go through everything there. So you could probably expect the e-arc then around next summer. Will be available at Bane.com around June, July. You'll be able to read it, but it'll be on shelves, I would guess, by September, would be my guess.
Yeah. And before that, remember that Disquiet Gods do come out in April. Yeah.
April 2nd, it will be available in hardcover and ebook. The audio should be out the same day. Historically, my audiobooks have been off by as much as a week or so we'll see what happens. But they're working on it. So that'll be out soon. Just a couple months. You can also pre-order it if you go to quailridgebooks.com. You can order a hardcover from them. They will even ship internationally. You might have to call them. But just say in the comment section during checkout, hey, I would like Christopher to sign my book, and how you would like it signed. Just be specific. Don't ask me to pick something. But if you want like your name and a quote or something, just tell me what the quote is, and we can do that for you. So that's quailridgebooks.com.
Okay. And yeah, I think that's pretty much from us today. And I want to say thank you so much to all of you who tuned in on this chat. And thank you so much to Christopher for visiting my channel. I will be reading Ashes of Man and also reviewing it next month, and then Disquiet Gods the month after that. And I hope many of you will tune in to watch that review as well. I certainly look forward to reading all of those, especially now Disquiet Gods, because so many of you praise that very highly. So yeah, I think that's pretty much from us today. And I want to say thank you so much once again. Thank you so much, Chris, and bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Petrik. It's been a pleasure being here.